but its methods survive to this day. There are lots of companies out there that intentionally shorten the lifespan of their products. It's a tactic known now as planned obsolescence. This was actually the subject of Casey Neistat's first viral video, all the way back in 2003.
Thank you for calling Apple. My name's Ryan. May I have your first name, please? Casey. All right. What seems to be the issue today?
I have an iPod that I bought about 18 months ago. The battery is dead on it.
18 months. Okay, it's past its year, which basically means for there'll be a charge of $255 plus a mailing fee to send it to us to refurb it, to correct it. But at that price, you might as well go get a new one.
This video got millions of views in a time before YouTube or social media. And it spawned a class action lawsuit, which Apple settled out of court. But it didn't stop the company from practicing planned obsolescence. After an iOS update in 2017, users of older iPhones found apps loading significantly slower or the device shutting down altogether. Apple said they throttled performance to protect the battery of older devices and increase their longevity. Of course, that wouldn't be an issue if the battery were replaceable. In a series of lawsuits that concluded in 2020, Apple was fined or reached settlements to pay hundreds of millions of dollars. Undoubtedly, this amount pales in comparison to the extra revenue they generate by limiting the lifespan of their products. But some would argue that planned obsolescence isn't just about greed, but that it's also good for everyone. During the Great Depression in the 1930s, when as much as a quarter of Americans were out of work, an American real estate broker, Bernard London, proposed mandatory planned obsolescence as a way to get people back to work and lift America out of the Depression. He wrote, "I would have the government assign a lease of life to shoes and homes and machines when they are first created, and they would be sold and used within the term of their existence definitely known by the consumer. After the allotted time had expired, these things would be legally dead and would be controlled by the duly appointed governmental agency and destroyed if there is widespread unemployment." Now this might sound like a wild, fringe idea, but people were clearly afraid of being put out of work by technological progress and products that were too good. There was even a popular Oscar-nominated film about it. This is The Man in the White Suit from 1951. It's about a scientist who invents the perfect fiber. It won't stain or break or fray.
I think I've succeeded in the copolymerization of amino acid residues and carbohydrate molecules, those containing ionic groups. It's really pretty simple.
The Academy Award nomination was for Best Screenplay. I kid you not. Anyway, everyone is initially excited about our hero's scientific discovery. He makes a suit out of the thread, and it has to be white because the fiber is so stain resistant it can't even be dyed. But this is when trouble strikes. The factory owners realize they won't be able to sell as much of this thread because it's so durable. And the workers worry it'll put them out of a job.
Why can't you scientists leave things alone? What about my bit of washing when there's no washing to do?
This is when you get the climactic scene where factory workers and factory owners team up to chase down the scientist to destroy him and his invention. And believe it or not, this movie may have been inspired by real events. In the 1940s, the synthetic fiber nylon replaced silk in stockings, and it was so durable that the products became an overnight sensation. There were literal riots when women tried to get their hands on them. When the manufacturers realized they had made the product too good, they didn't destroy the fiber, but they did follow the example of the Phoebus cartel. They instructed their engineers and scientists to find ways to weaken the product, to shorten its lifespan so people would have to buy more.
Now, it seems like consumers are finally fighting back against planned obsolescence. In the European Union and in over 25 states in the US, there's proposed legislation to enshrine the right to repair. And these laws would force manufacturers to make it easier to repair their products. They would have to provide information and access to parts, so you could replace a battery or fix a cracked screen at a third-party repair shop without voiding your warranty. So, if the right to repair does become law, does that mean artificial obsolescence will be gone for good? Sadly, no, because there is one last thing manufacturers can use to make their products obsolete, which is you.
Henry Ford released the first mass-market car, the Model T, in 1908. And he envisioned it like a workhorse, an affordable tool that wouldn't wear out, a bit like the everlasting light bulb. In 1922, Ford said, "We want the man who buys one of our cars never to have to buy another. We never make an improvement that renders any previous model obsolete." But by 1920, 55% of American families already owned a car. Nearly everyone that could afford one had one. And that same year, there was a small economic downturn driving down sales for both Ford and General Motors. In 1921, DuPont, the chemical and paint company, took over the controlling share in General Motors, and they started experimenting with painting cars different colors. Up until then, Henry Ford had said, you could have whatever color you like, so long as it's black. It took a couple years of testing, but in 1924, GM released their first cars in different colors, and soon after, they introduced a trick that feels very familiar now. Each new year, they would introduce cars in different colors.
The goal wasn't just to make Ford's Model T look outdated, but to make their own cars feel outdated every year, encouraging customers to trade in their old cars for shiny new ones. Years later, GM's head of design, Harley Earl, candidly discussed his role in creating what he called dynamic obsolescence. Our big job is to hasten obsolescence. In 1934, the average car ownership span was 5 years. Now, which was 1955, it is 2 years. When it is 1 year, we will have a perfect score. By the time he said this, General Motors was the most valuable company in the world, and it sold half of all vehicles purchased in the US every year. These days, the world's most valuable company, Apple, seems to have copied directly out of this playbook. I mean, new styles every year? Check. New special colors every year? Check. Marginal technological improvement? Check. I mean, is this useful innovation or just a gimmick? The inspiration for General Motors, and hence for Apple, comes from fashion, where real innovation is all but impossible. So the only way to make people feel the urgency to get out there and buy is to create styles that last but one season. The trouble then is you run through these styles too quickly, and then what are you supposed to do? Well, just recycle the styles from a few decades ago. The iPhone also shows this recycling trend. I mean, just look at the way the edges were initially rounded, and then they were squared off, and then they were rounded again, and now they're squared off. And how much do you want to bet that the iPhone 14 has rounded edges? I think the point is that with design and styling, there is no best. There's only different, which is apparently enough to remind us that we don't have the latest and greatest, so we have to rush out and buy. The only type of obsolescence we should support is technological, which brings us back to the light bulb. You know, in the last 20 years, light bulbs have gone from incandescent, which was basically unchanged for 100 years, to compact fluorescent, and now to LED. These can last anywhere from 10 to 50 times longer. That's pretty bright. So you're more likely to sell your house than to have to replace an LED bulb that you've installed inside it. So we've finally reached the point of what is essentially an everlasting light bulb. Hey, this video is sponsored by NordVPN. You know, I am featured in an episode of the British TV program QI. It's a show I really like, and I'd highly recommend it if you haven't seen it already. And it's on Netflix, but only if you're in the UK. I feel like TV and film are still trapped in antiquated business models where they divide up the world into broadcast territories. That doesn't make a lot of sense now that information can flow freely through the internet. Luckily, using NordVPN, anyone can set their location to the UK and watch whatever they like. If you're interested in seeing what streamers have to offer in different countries, you can get a huge discount on a 2-year plan at nordvpn.com/Veritasium. Use code Veritasium to get an extra month free. And using NordVPN, you can also protect your privacy by masking your IP address. In fact, you can change your IP twice to cover your web traffic with an extra layer of security. NordVPN has a no-logs policy. They don't track, collect, or share your private data, which is what a lot of the world's biggest companies are trying to do right now. So for privacy when browsing,